Welcome everyone to the inaugural broadcast for your Long Beach Ninkata in the Greatest Showdown. Today marks week 1 of the inaugural season, and Coach High Jump Sean has his roster primed and ready for today's match. The Ninkata are warming up on the field as we speak, staring down today's opponent, Coach OGalbina and his Carolina Roaring Moon. You start this season off with a clean slate, and there is no doubt that the week 1 jitters are hitting hard on both sides of the field. Now, while each team heads back into their respective locker rooms before the kickoff, why don't we break down the starting lineups for each team? And the starting lineups are presented to you by PokeHub. So starting with Coach OGalbina and the Carolina Roaring Moon, Ogal has decided to slot Raging Bolt in the first position, as you can see, and most likely for that intimidating factor, but we all know it's nothing more than a Raikou clone. And Raikou is fairly mediocre at best, but what it does have going for it is that new signature move, Thunderclap. While it offers a unique spin on Sucker Punch, we all know that it's merely an afterthought, just as much as Thunder is to Lightning. And speaking of Lightning, today's sponsor is Stone Emporium. They have a New Year's sale ending this Sunday where all Thunderstones are 40% off. Make sure to stop by Vernal Avenue in Lumio City to grab your Thunderstone and all of your stone needs today. That's Stone Emporium with their New Year's sale. Everything, including Thunderstones, 40% off. Back to the starting lineup. So Ogal slots Primarina in the second position, a very scary Pokemon, and one of the biggest threats that Ninkata are probably going to see this week. We all know this sparkling aria has quite the charm amongst the fans, but don't let that mask the killer voice of this siren song. Moving into the third position, we have Ogal interestingly has slotted this team's mascot, Roaring Moon. And with the new addition of Knockoff, I presume Ogal is hoping to shed some light on this Pokemon's true power, despite the community-wide disdain for this poor beast. And I'd like to just also further add to the Roaring Moon saga that Coach High Jump Sean heavily disrespects this Pokemon, so we'll see if that is reflected in the prep, or if he's making sure his prep is adequate enough to make this Pokemon look just as bad as he thinks it is. Now, we're getting into something hot. Blaziken is burning up that fourth position. The 25-point top-tiered Fire Chicken is trying to cement its status as on the field as the top dog, or the top chicken, the ace of the team, I must say. Or it will fall flat and prove it's an overhyped piece of cold turkey from my local grocery store. I'm leaning towards the latter. And then moving up closer to the rear here, Sandy Shocks fills in that fifth position for Ogal. This is definitely one of those X-Factor Pokemon here in the matchup. A potential Stealth Rocks and Spike stacking can prove pretty annoying for the Ninkata, which focuses more on a balanced pivot-styled structure. However, one positive for the Ninkata is that the Shocks might have a 4-move slot syndrome, which will potentially leave it vulnerable to one of Sean's potential threats or Mons in the matchup. So we're just going to have to keep our eye out for that and see how Ogal decides to tailor his set towards the matchup and how Sean decides to counteract it. And then rounding out the back end, Ogal decides to slot in the little Quillfish of the Hisuian variant. This potentially could be a way for Ogal to alleviate the move slots on the aforementioned Sandy Shocks by adding spikes to Quillfish and freeing up a move slot on Sandy Shocks. Intimidate is also pretty massive here, as the Ninkata has a predominantly physically based team, so it'll be interesting to see how he utilizes it here. And then on the bench, you can see on the right side there, he decided to wait on the debut of his Rillaboom, Boomer Sooner, Bronzong, and Colossal round out the rest of the bench. Ogal opting to rely on Raging Bolt and Sandy Shocks primarily as the flying resist in this matchup at the expense of zero hazard removal. As you can see, his only hazard removal in the entire team is that Colossal. So he must be very committed in playing to hazard stacking and kind of just mitigating the pivoting that Sean can try to utilize in the matchup. As well as try to mitigate the effectiveness of the Ninkata's removal attempts. And obviously, we will be covering that, as let's move on and introduce the starting lineup for the Long Beach Nincada. And here they are. In first position, one of Sean's Terra captains. It's an absolute fan favorite for the Nincada. One of the team's Terra captains, as I said. Rev your engines, everyone, for Revavroom. And then in the second position, it likes to play with its food. Dare say it kicks its opponent while they are down. The Grasshopper with the Sweet J's. That is young Low Kicks, making his debut for the Nincada. And then in the third position, a premier Draft League staple, the glorified Big Bird with the broken ability, the leader of this team, the first pick for the Long Beach Nincada in the TGS, Tornadus Therian. And then in that fourth position, it is the team's last line of defense against hazards, the only remover on this team. Treading the line of defeat, the Ivory Spinner, Iron Treads. And in that penultimate slot, a Nincada veteran returning from its strong stint in the World Pokemon Federation makes some noise for the Mailman Dragonite. And then in that final position, the ultimate glue to support this starting lineup, the Alien from Above, the Wall of Utility, Deoxys Defense rounds out this starting six for the Nincada here in week 1. And looking to make debuts in future weeks, the Nincada bench is just as powerful, with the likes of the Nincada's other Terra captain, Saraledge, Overquill, Mienshao, and Rotom Wash. It looks like the teams are ready for kickoff, so let's get this week 1 showdown started. And again, these TGS team lineups and starting lineups were brought to you by PokeHub. And we have pulled up the broadcast here, ladies and gentlemen. As you can see on the right side, we have the Long Beach Nincada starting 6, led in first position by the Terra captain Revavroom, who is boasting a Terra Fairy typing. And OGalbina's Terra captains include Raging Bolt and Hisuian Quillfish, both of which Ogal has decided to bring as Terra Water. So it'll be something that Sean would have to watch out for throughout the match, but obviously he has no immediate way to pressure it super effectively, at least from a stab perspective, since he has no grass or electric type brought into the matchup. And obviously, the Nincada don't have a grass type on the team. And interestingly enough, the Nincada are probably going to lead with Tornadus Therian here, I would imagine. It's the most neutral lead here that is a very fast mon into this matchup. It actually outspeeds everything bar a Scarper, or like a Booster Energy Sandy Shocks. That can at least pressure the Torn back, and Torn will be able to maintain momentum into the matchup here. OGalbina most likely wants to lead with Sandy Shocks if he wants to pressure the Torn, especially since the Torn lead is so obvious as it is. But I could see him trying to lead with something like Primarina as well to try and get up massive damage, but he has to obviously watch out for a knockoff if he is of the Choice Specs variant. So let's see what this matchup entails. So the battle has started between High Jump Sean and OGalbina. Sean has decided to lead with Tornadus Therian as we expected, but no Sandy Shocks lead. It's actually Quillfish with the Intimidate here. And I expect a taunt or a knockoff to come out from the Torn here to kind of prevent this Quillfish from going for Toxic or Spikes of some kind. And Sean does go for the knockoff. He opts to try to remove the Eviolite, which will help his predominantly physical team here. But obviously the Shocks takes nothing from the knockoff, but Sean decides to be a little risky here and stay in and click U-turn on this Sandy Shocks and getting some extra chip. Obviously the booster speed was not a threat to Sean. He probably could guarantee live a hit from the Shocks, and he expected a hazard setting click there, which happens to be the case. He brings in Air Balloon Shreds to prevent the Earth Power from Shocks, but this Shocks is not walled by Iron Shreds as it goes for Body Press, as Sean opts to go for Stealth Rocks instead of Rapid Spin here, which could have been a good amount of pressure. If he was able to Rapid Spin, he could click High Horsepower Earthquake the following turn. But he decides to swap and scout the Earth Power, I would presume, but Sandy Shocks goes for Press, so that kind of confirms to us as the viewer that Sandy Shocks probably is not packing Earth Power, and Deoxys is in. So I would imagine this Volt Switch is going to come out. As it does, the booster is gone on Shocks now, but he decides to bring in Roaring Moon to immediately pressure Deoxys. Let's see what Deoxys goes for. I'd imagine it'd be like a recover of some kind, just to heal off that damage, but Sean opts to go for Spikes. He sees no removal and just goes for the Spikes right away. And this Deoxys is at 70%. Obviously, not the position health-wise it wants to be at, but dual hazards being up is incredible here. Roaring Moon with that booster speed as well, not booster attack, not going to be able to dish out nearly as much damage as it looks like. Sean decides to go hard Torn here to take a knockoff, but probably a middle ground play, not knowing exactly what the Roaring Moon was going to click. It's hard for him to go into Revavroom because it's not terastallized yet, but he decides to bring in that Revavroom here with an Air Balloon, so kind of just a great way to check Roaring Moon in all facets here, as he decides to stay in versus the Revavroom, and I imagine he's going to go for like an Acrobatics, but he goes for Taunt. For some reason, he decides to go for Taunt instead of attacking, and Sean goes for a Gunk Shot, potentially risking a miss there, but he does land it and knock out the Moon. Obviously, Low Kicks was a potential bring-in as well, but Sean probably figuring that the Roaring Moon, if it was set up, had to have packed Protect on its set, so Revavroom was the safest option to bring in, but here comes the Quillfish. Obviously, Revavroom is taunted, so if it does have Parting Shot, it can't Parting Shot here, and obviously Ogal taking great use of that sequence there and doubles into his Primarina, expecting the Treads to come in on that Quillfish, but Treads just gets a nice Volt Switch off, and obviously does not fear the Sandy Shocks coming in because they can pressure it out right after. So he decides to Volt Switch, get some chip on Prim. He's already at 50%, and he decides to sack off the Tornadus Therian. Obviously, probably there to help mitigate that Roaring Moon as a middle ground, and obviously its use is no longer needed, especially with Rillaboom on the bench. But Revavroom decides to come in here, and Primarina decides to stay in. Interestingly enough, Revavroom not attacking here, which could be a bit foolish, but maybe Sean expects the Quillfish to come in, and it goes for the Parting Shot. But since the special attack drops happen, he knows for a fact that this is probably Choice Specs. That did a lot of damage even at -1 to a Deoxys defense. Probably confirms to him the item and gives him a better pivot into Deoxys to heal up here, which is what I'd imagine would come out here. Quillfish already at 50%, taking all this hazard chip, but Deoxys does go for a recover, and I would assume Sean, similar to what he did before, might want to just scout what this Quillfish is going to do and see if it has Toxic. So he's going to go hard Shreds. He wants to remove these rocks by the looks of it, and Quillfish going for Crunch does absolutely no damage to Iron Shreds. And this is a free Rapid Spin for Sean if he decides to take it, and he does. Quillfish, I assume, doesn't carry a water move here, but it does go for Crunch. Let's see if it packs Aqua Jet. It might be able to take out the Treads, but he does not have Aqua Jet, and Quillfish goes down. So no Spikes have been set so far, and the Sandy Shocks had Rocks, Body Press, and Volt Switch, so I'm curious what the last move possibly is. It could very well still also be Earth Power, but he never went for it on Treads. But Raging Bolt comes in, takes 25% from hazards, but Iron Treads easily is going to go for Volt Switch here, as it does. And Raging Bolt pretty low at this point, but that did absolutely no damage, 13%. I know Treads is not especially offensive mon, but based on that super effective damage, that might be a more Spadef variant of Bolt. Let's see what his item is. And Deoxys has leftovers, and Raging Bolt does not, so it could potentially be Assault Vested, or maybe it's like a Citrus Berry of some kind. But Deoxys' defense goes for Cosmic Power, and this is going to be a problem for sure. Sandy Shocks decides to come in here, and I imagine this is going to be a big problem for OGalbina, as he doesn't have a good way to break this down outside of the Primarina. But here we go. The last move on Sandy Shocks is revealed to be Thunder Wave. And this will allow Raging Bolt and Primarina to actually just outspeed Deoxys defense. Deoxys defense also outspeeds base form Blaziken, so this should give him chances if he can get Paras here to kind of just take down this Deoxys. Primarina comes in and it's now in Torrent range, as let's see what the Deoxys goes for off that fast pivot. It goes for Nightshade and it does not knock out Primarina. So a Hydro Pump is going to do massive amounts of damage here. Most likely will not kill the Deoxys, or he might go for Surf to get guaranteed damage, but he does opt to go for Hydro Pump and he misses. An incredibly unfortunate miss, which would have probably put this Deoxys down as low as 25 to 30%. And it's looking really good for our Nincada here as Primarina goes down and Deoxys is basically at full with +1 defenses and no immediate way to break it. But here comes Blaziken, and obviously OGalbina knows that Deoxys only has Nightshade to hit him, so he has to go for broke with an SD here if he really wants to play the para. And Sean decides to swap into a Dragonite, and that's a Flare Blitz from a Blaziken, Life Orb Blaziken, that does absolutely 0 damage here. I would imagine Dragonite is defensive here and just going to go for an Extreme Speed, just to secure damage on Blaziken. Sean opts not to go for the Extreme Speed. Very risky play, as what does he opt to click here? He opts to click Dragon Claw and knock out the Blaziken. Had that Stone Edge crit, it would have been a pretty bad position for Sean at that point. Granted, he did have low kicks in the back with priority, but Dragonite obviously able to tank that Stone Edge without a crit and is able to knock out the Blaziken. It's just Sandy Shocks and Raging Bolt. Sean knows that Sandy Shocks really can't touch Deoxys, nor can Raging Bolt if it is Assault Vested. It could still very well be like a Resto Chesto set at this point and just be very Spadef. But based on the damage we saw earlier with Raging Bolt, it could potentially be kind of Assault Vest offensive Raging Bolt. But he goes for Draco Meteor here, does over half. Not quite a lot of damage, and as we said, that 30% damage that the Primarina would have potentially knocked out from him makes this play a little bit differently. I assume Sean probably would have potentially sacked off his Dragonite at that point earlier in the game, but Volt Switch comes out here from the Raging Bolt, and obviously it's going to be extremely low at this point. Everything's in range of low kicks, and obviously he still has the Balloon Rev of Room and the Iron Treads still at healthy. Deoxys manages to break through here after being paired the turn before, and at this point Sean doesn't even need a Cosmic Power. This looks like a wrap. The Hazard's doing OGalbina in, as Shocks goes for a Hail Mary Stealth Rocks here and gets knocked out to Nightshade. And unless somehow this Raging Bolt is able to pull out a random Resto Chesto, or is able to start setting up with that and get a bunch of crits in the process, it might be possible for OGalbina, but it all depends on this last turn here, as it's Raging Bolt versus the World. But he decides to go for Draco Meteor, kind of confirming he doesn't have any recovery, and Deoxys, with after leftovers, would be able to take another, but it knocks out Raging Bolt here, and Deoxys picking up 3 kills to clean up this game. And obviously assisted kills there with Rev of Room, Iron Treads, and Dragonite. But wow, what a game for the Nincada. The Deoxys putting in absolute work for the Nincada here. And just like that, we are now 1-0 on the season, and Coach Hydem Sean has got to be ecstatic with that starting performance. Great prep, great middle grounds there to kind of cover everything, and really capitalizing early on the lack of hazard removal. Obviously Colossal on the bench, and after noticing that, he commits to Stealth Rocks rather than spinning the rocks away, as well as getting up Spikes. A decision I think proved very valuable for him, as it started to easily wear down the likes of Raging Bolt, Primarina, Sandy Shocks, Quillfish, heck, even Blaziken, all into range of potential priority between low kicks and the Dragonite. So very well-constructed game plan, well-constructed build from the home team here, and we're more than ecstatic to start off 1-0 in the Greatest Showdown. And we're looking forward to our week 2 opponent. I believe is going to be Aster J. Looking forward to see how his results work out for him in week 1, and looking forward to that week 2 bout. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this broadcast of the Greatest Showdown for week number 1 of the Long Beach Tenkata, and we'll see you next week. Peace. All right, here just for a brief little presser after the game. I'm obviously the coach of the Long Beach Tenkata. Hi, Jim Sean, and primarily just wanted to take the small amount of time to kind of explain what I brought and why I brought it, and then ultimately how it played out in the match. So obviously, our leading charge was Terra Fairy Revavroom with an air balloon, and obviously was packing Gunk Shot, as you saw. Commentator obviously mentioned Parting Shot, which was true. We did have Parting Shot as a way to pivot around things like Bronzong specifically, as I didn't have a concrete way to hit it unless it was not Levitate, which definitely was going to be Levitate. But we actually brought Gunk Shot, High Horsepower Shift Gear, Parting Shot. It was completely walled by Bronzong if it was Levitate, and that's why I brought Parting Shot. I didn't want to sacrifice any of the other moves, and I wanted to be able to pivot around in case I needed to. And as you saw, even if Primarina did stay in like it did, I would be able to pivot into Deoxys, and at least I could scout what its item was, and if it was Specs, it made it easier to pivot around. And also, if he did pivot into Quillfish, he was taking more hazards, so I kind of understand why he stayed in ultimately there. But yeah, Revavroom was that set. It was mainly there as another check to Roaring Moon. Torn obviously can't do it by itself. It doesn't have the power to knock out Roaring Moon in one hit, because obviously Roaring Moon has a really good SpDef stat, and Torn obviously is a special mon. It can run physical moves, but it's not going to do anything. It's not stab. But yeah, that's why Rev was brought just as an insurance for me. And then Low Kicks was in that second position. It was mainly here for the priority. Like I said, First Impression Sucker Punch was very good versus this team because there was a lack of hazard removal. If he did opt to bring Colossal, which I did expect him to bring, I was surprised to see it benched. But I knew that if there was no Colossal, I could just get up Spikes and Rocks pretty easily in the early part of the game, which is what I did. And I knew once the team was forced to pivot around and take Chip, it was going to be put in the range of my priority moves. And it also gave me something else to kind of revenge a weakened Raging Bolt, especially with First Impression, and it kind of outpaced Thunderclap, which is primarily what I was afraid of, like some Calm Mind, bulky leftovers, Raging Bolt, like FizzDef. But he opted to bring Assault Vest. I guess he was very scared of Tornadus Therian. I mean, that's primarily my special mon on the team. There's also Rotom Wash, but nothing else is really special on my team, so kind of interested why he brought Assault Vest there when my team is predominantly physical. But yeah, it was mainly there. First Impression Sucker Punch, had Knockoff and U-Turn as well, just for momentum. Primarily, it was just there in the back to revenge certain threats, especially Roaring Moon, if it didn't have Protect. And again, I brought the insurance of Revavroom with Torn and Low Kicks to make sure that Roaring Moon could not get out of hand. And it wasn't going to have enough slots to be able to beat my team. But yeah, we went to next is I believe I skipped him on Tornadus Therian. It was just a defensive pivot. Bleak Wind. Obviously, you saw Knockoff and U-Turn. It did have Taunt. It was there mainly if I needed to taunt like a Raging Bolt to prevent it from setting up, from resting. If I wanted to sack off Torn at that point. Taunt was also very good for like Quillfish, if can't Toxic, or Spikes. I obviously didn't click Taunt off lead because I didn't really care if he got up a Spike, since my Tread sequences were pretty good into his team. So I was pretty comfortable being able to rapid spin it off if he did get up a Spike. And obviously Treads was Balloon, so I wouldn't be able to take the Spikes off the initial hit. And I went for Knockoff because I wanted the Violet Gun. Simple as that. It would be way easier to wear down, especially for Rev and Low Kicks. The Intimidate was going to be really annoying, but I figured it was a perfectly fine option to click knockoff there and scout what the item was on shocks. But yeah, it was mainly here as a middle ground to a lot of different ones. Treads was balloon, obviously. Pretty bulky, had speed, had horsepower as you saw, rapid spin, volt switch, and stealth rock. You saw the full move set there. It didn't really need to hit things like Rillaboom or Bronzong. I could just volt switch on them. Like I said, hazards were going to be up, so any small amount of chip was going to add up consistently. If he didn't bring Colossal, and this could at least pressure the Colossal, right, with high horsepower, even if there was terrain, because it's not terrain named. Obviously, I risked the miss, but we roll with the punches. Pretty consistent set for me. If he didn't have body press on shocks, which is, I figured he could potentially run Stealth Rock Spikes both on shocks if he didn't want to bring Quillfish and run EP and Volt Switch, but he opted to run press, and then instead of spikes, he actually ran Thunder Wave. So worked out for me. I think his Quillfish did have spikes. He told me after the game, and he never got a chance to set them up. And honestly, I don't blame him. It was very tough, but I think it would have at least put on more pressure on Deoxys, which was kind of the bane of his existence this match. Dragonite was our 5th Mon. Fizz Death, it was really just here for Blaziken. But he has 25-point Blaziken. No disrespect to Coach OGalbina and the Carolina Roaring Moon, but I find that as a pretty fraudulent pick 1. I think Blaziken is severely overrated as a pickup here, and I wanted to make sure that it did absolutely nothing versus my team to prove me otherwise. So Dragonite was here defensively. It chewed any type of combo of hits from Blaziken if he was Orb, which it was. And as you saw, I did risk not clicking Extreme Speed there and getting crit by Stone Edge, but it worked out for us. He didn't crit us, but obviously the best play there was to Extreme Speed, just to put him in range of hazards, because Extreme Speed would have 2-shot him anyways. So bad play by me. Didn't get punished for it. Last Mon, Deoxys. Nightshade was obviously what you saw. Spikes, recover, cosmic power. This thing just walled his team. I mean, outside of Roaring Moon, he really had no way to pressure this. You could argue Quillfish as well, but that thing was going to get worn down, and I had pretty solid responses to it with Torn and Iron Tread. So I wasn't really afraid of things pressuring Deoxys. Cosmic power in my testing basically walled the team, like everything. A lot of the end games came down to Cosmic power, whether or not I got crit. In this case, I only needed 1 because he wasn't Calm Mind Primarina, he wasn't Calm Mind Raging Bolt. So I really only needed 1 here, and I could just Nightshade, recover, even with the T-Wave. Obviously, I don't think I would have stayed in versus Blaziken regardless, even if Deoxys wasn't paralyzed. I just could not let that thing nuke me. I needed the health on Deoxys for the Raging Bolt and the Sandy Shocks there, so I was perfectly fine going Dragonite. He would have had to hard read and go for like Stone Edge Raw to potentially 2-shot my Dragonite, but again, I would have Extreme Speeded it, and that would have put it in range of low kicks, so ultimately it didn't really end up mattering against us. But yeah, this Deoxys feasted on him, and there really wasn't much you could do. As for like some of the in-game sequences, obviously I kind of mentioned some of the things where I like, oh, I should have Extreme Speeded with Dragonite. That was primarily it. You could argue I could have Gunk Shotted with Rev versus Prim, but he kind of had to make a play. I could afford the overplay there because positionally it was fine, and I got to heal up my Deoxys anyways, so it wasn't too bad of a sequence there for me. It would have been nice to get low kicks in. It was the only Mon on the starting 6 that didn't really get to see the field, so he doesn't get to make his debut officially in the game, but he obviously was primed and ready to clean up as he was able to prove in the testing leading up to this game day. And I believe the other thing would have been like Rapid Spin versus Stealth Rocks when Treads was in versus Shocks. I didn't have to Rapid Spin. I felt like I valued getting up the hazards early, and Rocks really only hurt my low kicks, and low kicks was a late game Mon, so I felt pretty fine keeping Rocks up. I knew I would be able to Rapid Spin later versus say like a Quillfish or a Sandy Shocks if I pressure it out. So I thought that was perfectly fine of a play, and it worked out for me. But yeah, that's a brief discussion for you guys, and please support the Long Beach Nakata all season. Leave down a comment, your favorite part of the match or favorite part of our team building process this week, and come back for our week 2 match against the Montreal Habsels and Coach Aster J.